So normally the closing remarks would be more about, let's celebrate the big numbers. Let's talk about the state of union. And we are doing really well. The numbers today, Brian already talked about it. We're over 5 million downloads for Cordova this year. We still have 3 months to go. Last year, we had 4 million downloads. So the project is continuing to grow and grow and grow, which had me think about a different topic that I wanted to mention or close this day with. Brian also mentioned the goal of PhoneGap is to cease to exist, and this is something that he coined very early in the project. And if we're continuing to grow, are we doing our job? I think this is a really powerful statement, though. Some people disagree with it. I've used it to guide a lot of my decisions over the past couple of years. I think it has deep meaning, but at the same time, what the hell does it mean? Why would you, if your goal is to not exist, why would you even create the project to begin with? It's something that I always think to myself. And another way to frame that same goal is that we had this goal that we want to be able to create web apps without compromise. When we created this project, we didn't want to write the same app multiple times. We wanted to write it once, the same way that you write a website once and it works on any device, on any browser, on any operating system. That was the initial premise that we had. We couldn't do that, and so we wanted to then make that possible. And we know we've succeeded as a project when we don't actually have to exist anymore because browsers support it natively. So what do we need to get there? To me, it's about the user experience, which really just breaks down to great user interface, the right functionality so that you can actually do what you need for your customers and your clients, and acceptable performance. Unless you're building video games or something really rich, your performance bar might be a little higher or lower, depending. And like I said, if we can hit that, and if native browsers can support it, then we know we've succeeded, and we can slowly cease to exist. So what I want to do is, for the rest of this talk, I just want to cover some of the key decisions that I think we made that have helped always keep us focused on ceasing to exist, doing right for you guys so that you can actually write an application and have faith that one day it'll actually run in the browser. You don't have to rely on Cordova, and your code is actually going to get more use out of itself. So I broke it into 4 main sections. The first, and I think this is the most powerful decision that we made right at the very beginning, we chose to align with the web, which is a little weird. When you describe PhoneGap or Cordova to people and you explain, we're just a bare-bone browser. That's it. We've just removed the Chrome. It's a browser, no navigation, and then we just happen to extend it. Through JavaScript, you can actually hit the backend and hit native bits. Usually the light goes on for people. They realize this is just a browser. I can do anything that I've done in the past with this. And it's a very simple idea, but it's extremely powerful. And the result is that back when we created this project in 2008, more and more projects have started to exist since then. It started with simple things like jQuery, but it's grown and grown and grown to projects that we could never predict, such as Stencil, which isn't a framework. It's not a build chain. What is it? Build API. Or React, which is a little crazy. Or Babel, which we would never have predicted back then. But because we chose to align with the web, we've turned competition into a community. And we've actually allowed you to build off of all of this. So I think it's a very powerful decision that we made early on. And it's why this project is still here. And it's why so many people can benefit from it. Now, the second thing that we actually decided quite early on was we decided to align with the W3C widget, or packaged app was another name for it. Back then, it was a proposed W3C spec. And the idea of it was that you could actually include a config.xml. You could define the name of your application. You could define the icon, the splash screen, some basic security. And you could actually wrap up just an HTML, CSS, and JavaScript app, zip it up as a zip file, and a device could actually install it, whether it was a browser on your desktop or a browser on your phone, or you could just upload that zip in some form. It's a very powerful idea, and we thought this is great. This is going towards the installable app view that we want. So we jumped on the standards committee. We started giving feedback. We added the config.xml to PhoneGap and Cordova. And we ended up becoming very much like what Babel is doing right now. We ended up becoming a sandbox for the standards group to be able to start to play with these ideas and bring them to life very early on. And we slowly got some positive reinforcement that we were in the right direction. These are all dead platforms today, but all three of them have came up today as well. Palm WebOS was the very first platform to actually implement this, and they did it the best, I think. You would just include an HTML, CSS, and JavaScript code, config.xml, zip it up, and as long as you pointed your device to that in some way, it would prompt you to install it. And that was how you installed an app. BlackBerry, in BlackBerry version 6, they actually supported the spec, and then they extended it. And the same idea, it was very easy. Just shoot a zip file up, and it uncompressed it. And then Firefox OS did a great job. So good that you could actually take a normal Cordova app without any extra plugins and just compile it for Firefox OS, and it just worked fine. Sadly, the spec never got anywhere, of course. These platforms implemented it, but the major platforms never did. And so the spec never got out a proposal, and it just slowly died away. So that's the history of why you have to use config.xml. It's not enjoyable. We don't love it. Why would you want to do XML when JSON seemed to make a lot more sense? But we were making decisions to align with standards under the hopes that you would actually be doing it the right way when it lands in the browser. Now, the next step that we took was we decided to align very closely with web development. So when PhoneGap and Cordova first started off, this whole model view controller approach to web development existed. Rails was just getting really popular at that time. And this idea of a single page app didn't really exist on people's radars. But after a couple of years, single page apps started to exist, API-driven development started to exist, and people wanted a better way and a new way to do development. And so new tooling emerged. It was very common to run a bunch of command line tools to actually build your app. It was very common to actually write a single page app that you'd package up and run. And so we started to support that. The very first command line for PhoneGap and Cordova were basically bash scripts. And then we had Python scripts. And then we had a Ruby command line tool because Rails had a Ruby command line tool. But as we saw web development really take off from the client side, we re-implemented it in Node. And we kept it that way, matching the workflows that were expected. Another example that we tried to do was add a browser platform support. Develop the idea of opening up your IDE, running the simulator, checking your results, going back to your code editor, making a change, going back, compiling in the IDE. This workflow is really awkward when, as a web developer, you just want to save something and see the change in your browser. And so we started to look into the browser platform to try to closely mimic the workflow that you're having, even though that device is always getting in the way. Downside of the browser platform is that it doesn't actually simulate a device. It's really great, especially like Cordova Simulate. I think it's going to take you a long way today. But back then, there were weird browser quirks that would bite you unless you actually ran it on a device. So then we added the PhoneGap developer app. So you could actually do live previews. You could save the code. It would refresh on the device. You got this save refresh workflow that we really want as developers. But you were seeing the real app on your device with the actual functionality. Most recent example is in Cordova's world. We've added NPM package JSON support. So now everything that you define for your web app is sitting in package JSON, and Cordova can sit in there too. So now config.xml is taking a bit of a backstage, which is matching the workflow that you guys want. But there's something new on our radar that's really just started to come up in the past year and a half, maybe 2 years. It's progressive web apps. And this is really the future that we want to embrace. It's the next W3C widget that we saw, and we really want to move forward with this. The premise of PWAs, or progressive web apps, is that you can add a app manifest JSON file rather than a config.xml and do the same thing, define the name of your app, the security, the functionality inside the app. You can host that PWA online, and if someone browses to it in the browser, it'll prompt them to install it. And when they install it, it'll create an icon on their home screen. When they launch that app, there's no Chrome. Basically the same thing that Cordova has been trying to achieve this whole time, which is awesome. It also adds additional functionality. So you're seeing a lot of media APIs popping up. A great one is push. When people install this PWA onto their device, they get real push notification support. You get service worker support so that you can actually handle networking in offline states and caching. You can handle push notifications. It's really awesome, and it's really where we want to go. And because it's progressive, you don't have to buy into anything in particular. You can pick and choose the pieces that you want. So we think this is the future, and it's where we want to move towards. Today it works on Android, doesn't work on iOS. So is Cordova dead? Have we ceased to exist? Nope, not yet. But we think that this is the right direction to start moving in. If you can actually start building PWA apps right now, you can go very far. As long as you don't need, if you only need Android support and you don't need any additional functionality, you can actually put that PWA app online and you're set. Android's kind of cool because you can actually submit that PWA app to the App Store as well. So maybe you don't host it online. Maybe you just put that PWA app in the App Store and put a price tag next to it. So now you're gaining discoverability through the App Store. You might be able to monetize it as well. If you want a lower feature version, you could actually put it online. Today, iOS doesn't support it, sadly. In that situation, we want you to fall back on Cordova. But if you actually don't need iOS, Android is a great solution, then deploy it online. Likewise, if you're missing a feature, so of course you're only matching really what the web offers. Maybe you need encryption. Maybe you need the keyboard plugin. Honestly, like that's one of the best ones around. In that case, you can fall back on Cordova. So again, you can write a PWA app. You know you're writing for the future. You can even deploy it online today, and as browsers start to support it, you're set. But Cordova's got your back at the end of the day, so you can compile that PWA code and just distribute it through an app store as you need. So to me, the question is like, how can you help us? I think the very first thing is to actually, with the next app that you build, consider doing a PWA app. It's just a web app. It's the same thing that you're doing today. You just have to pick one feature that PWA supports, and it's an emerging spec right now. When you pick that one feature, if you want it to work in iOS, you can just use our PWA plugin. Very similar to the preset idea that Babel talked about, we have a PWA plugin, which is really just a plugin of plugins. It just references a whole bunch of other plugins. And as we see needs, we polyfill the browsers. And as the browsers start to support them natively, we remove that polyfill out. Now, it's still an ongoing effort, this plugin. So if you're using it, give us feedback around it. We can prioritize what you're using. We're guessing, for the most part, which PWA features do you need the most. But just giving us feedback so that we can actually choose what to work on would help out a lot. And likewise, not required, but pull requests are awesome. We're always small teams, so even the smallest pull request helps out a ton. So to me, when we come back to this question, are we on track to cease to exist? I think the answer is yeah, we are. But it's taking a hell of a lot longer than we ever thought, honestly. We thought we would be done by now, and we're seeing that there's actually a long future ahead. Even as PWAs land, you're inevitably going to want additional functionality that the web isn't ready to expose. We want you building PWA apps and falling back on Cordova to get those extra features. Cool, guys. So that was a nice short talk. I know I'm standing between you and beer. I always do this spiel at the end, but this is a pretty rare opportunity. So for people using an open source project and the committers themselves in the same room, going out for drinks, talking to the committers, this whole developer fatigue that happens or maintainer fatigue is very real. So giving us feedback around what you're doing, show us your cool app that you've built. It encourages us every day. Giving us feedback around what we can focus on to fix or improve always helps. And so taking advantage of the next couple hours as we're drinking on the rooftop would be really awesome. And then it's my first time in New York, so I'm pretty stoked that we threw this conference here this year. Usually we do it on the West Coast. So I'm going to explore the city, and I hope you guys have a good time exploring it too. Yeah, thanks.